S24, S24 FE. I mean, way over my head. Let's break down and compare the differences between the S24 and the S24 Plus in the same breath, and the S24 FE. Let's go. Samsung have just announced the Galaxy S24 FE. Rather than do a hands-on impressions of the FE, you might want to know how it compares to the Galaxy S24. Its older sibling that's more polished and refined than the newest lineup of the S24 series. We're going to break it down into the categories that I normally like to do things in: design, display, camera, performance. And starting with design, the first thing you immediately notice with the FE is it is massive. I mean, forget comparing it to the S24 and the S24 Plus. It is the same footprint in size as the Galaxy S24 Ultra. I've got a case here from friend of the channel's Thinborn for the S24 Ultra, and the FE slots in perfectly. The only difference that you notice is the corners, obviously, of the squared off nature of the S24 sort of doesn't fit in there, but even the camera rings at the back kind of slot in nicely. So from a size point of view, it's very much similar to an S24 Ultra. Switching back though to the S24, what you notice is a bit of a consistent design ethos. You've got the rounded corners around the frame. You've got the consistent minimalist cameras that float sort of off the back of the phone. Even down to the placement of the flash, it's now in the same spot. What is different though with the camera rings is that the S24 FE kind of is like a bit more above the phone on the back, whereas the S24 kind of doesn't sit as high above. You kind of have a bit more flush to the surface. Now, it doesn't really make much difference when you're looking at the phone front on, but from the rear, it does give a less premium vibe about it. That's something I noticed. The other big design difference, aside from size, is the difference in finishes. You do have a more improved durability glass on the back of the FE, but it is not matte finish like the FE is. It's got that glossy glass finish. And that's okay. And the only thing I don't really like about it is how it reflects light. It sort of doesn't absorb it like the matte finish does. But some people like glossy glass, and good for them. They can get that on the FE. Something that I did notice though immediately is how Samsung have subtly curved the aluminium mid-frame to meet the back glass. So with a phone this big, you'll probably expect it to be super uncomfortable. But Samsung seem to have subtly changed the way the frame works. So it's got this slight curve around the back here to meet the frame. The S24 did as well, but the FE is just a little bit more pronounced. So when you're holding it, it's not digging into your hands. It's not sharp and sort of uncomfortable. It sort of actually feels quite nice. And with the rounded corners around the bottom, you're kind of getting a nice sort of feel about it. Side by side too, the FE is actually noticeably thicker. Whether or not that's down to just Samsung making it thicker on purpose, because it doesn't need to be that thick for the bigger battery. The S24 Plus proves that, but that's just how they've made it. From the display point of view, the bezels are noticeably thicker. And Samsung, this is just their playbook. They make the bezels thicker on their mid to lower end devices to really differentiate that premium nature of the high end. But also along with that, the 10 megapixel selfie camera is also a lot bigger versus the 12 megapixel selfie camera on the S24, and we'll dip into camera a little bit later. You can see how much bigger it is. So when you're consuming media and sort of just browsing on your phone, that punch hole is noticeably larger. That's just something you'll have to get used to. What you won't have to get used to though is the silver camera ring that was existing on last year's FE, gone. The peak brightness with the display is better on the S24 versus the FE. And you can notice that as well in things like videos. There's a toggle in here that allows you to turn on extra brightness for videos. That doesn't exist for the FE. And you can see the brightness difference when you're consuming media. It's definitely noticeable. But even outdoors, the peak brightness on this is much higher. Let me know which design you prefer in the comments. I definitely prefer the sleeker, more sophisticated premium nature of the S24. A lot of people say, oh, it's the same. This design cheapens this. But when you have them side by side in your hands, you absolutely notice the more premium attention to detail on the S24 versus the likes of the FE. Now we'll turn our attention to the cameras. Starting with the hardware differences, surface level, you have a pretty similar setup. You have an ultra wide, a main 1x camera with 50 megapixels and a 3x telephoto, but they're not made the same. Samsung usually nerfed the ultra wide camera in the FE. It's no different. The 50 megapixel main camera is the same. So Samsung have actually not nerfed the main camera, but the 3x telephoto is still the 8 megapixel 3x telephoto from the original FE. And what I noticed, just to quickly talk about output, is that it's cropped in heavier versus the crop on the 10 megapixel 3x camera on here, which is just super weird. They're both 3x, but one's cropped in and takes out a lot more of the photo versus what this one does. From an output point of view, there's only really a couple things that I've noticed sort of early on. The S24 FE from its main camera is superb. I really like the way it's balancing things like the shadows and the lighter areas. It's not overexposing things like the grass or the table. Whereas the S24, running up-to-date firmware, mind you, was overexposing things. They've got the same main camera, the same processor, so there's no reason why the processing differences should be that much. But it was something that I sort of noticed too in the Fold 6 versus S24 Ultra, is that the Fold 6 kind of did a really good job at balancing that stuff out too. So Samsung doesn't need the best camera hardware or most advanced processor to get a really good processing algorithm done. And it looks like the FE has kind of balanced that nicely. Things like the darker areas and like this tent photo, for example, had a little bit more detail about it as well, which is nice. As far as zoom goes, the S24 is better. Even though they're both 3x telephoto, the 3x from the S24 FE is soft and mushy. And when you go anywhere beyond 3x, it just kind of falls apart. The 3x, 10x, and 30x on the S24 are better than it is on the S24 FE. This same sort of difference I noticed in video too, where the video, I noticed that the FE did a really good job at balancing the sort of highlighted areas, the highlight areas, didn't overexpose them, kept them nice and sort of in check, whereas the S24, again, just struggled slightly. In isolation, you might not even notice it. When you put it next to the S24 FE, I did. Now this is the video quality from the rear camera, like when shooting a person. I also want to test the microphone quality too. It's like I picked the worst possible environment. I've got a generator going on just behind me, and I'm in a kind of a loud football tournament that's happening this weekend here on the Gold Coast. So this is the audio from the Galaxy S24, and then now switching to the audio from the Galaxy S24 FE. So you should obviously notice a difference. However, I don't know. The rest of the experience across these phones pretty similar, barring a couple of changes in the software. But outside of that, the hardware is pretty much the same. So we should be expecting a similar microphone performance, but it's a perfect place to test, see if it isolates my voice well. You let me know in the comments below. But I think for output, it's negligible, right? Both phones will do the job that you need it to from an output perspective. If you're just taking photos out and about, like a sports carnival or a nice day out, you're going to get good photos out of both. What you really need to know the difference of is what they're capable of doing. So in terms of software and sort of camera modes. The good news is the S24 FE has sacrificed nothing, except at this stage Expo Raw. But again, I'm filming this before embargo, so that could change once the device officially launches and we see it appear maybe on the Galaxy Store, but it's not in the modes, so I don't have high hopes for that. But outside of that, everything else is as is. Dual recording works exactly the same on the FE as it does on the S24. Select your two cameras, away you go. Single take, using all of the cameras available to you, it's there. They both have 8K 30 FPS. If we go back to last year, the S23 FE only did 8K 24, and it was a waste of time. Now they have proper 8K 30, and you can actually see that side by side here, you don't lose anything. It's the same crop, it's the same quality, which is excellent. Pro video mode, exactly the same. What's really good too is the 4K 120 slow motion also is there on the FE as it is on the S24. Samsung have done a really good job in sort of keeping that going, and that consistency with camera modes is there. So if you're not wanting to maybe spend that little bit extra on the S24, you can still get a very similar camera experience with pretty much all of the same modes available to you on the S24 FE. That for me is more important than output, because you have that flexibility of what Samsung's camera can allow you to do. And now I want to talk about the performance. These are both running EXYNOS 2400 in where I'm from. This is future editing Dan here. This morning I had my briefing with Samsung, and it is called the EXYNOS 2400E, which explains why it's that slightly underclocked processor that you're about to see in Geekbench. I will not do benchmarking scores, so ignore the fact that Geekbench is open. The reason why I've used it is because I did read somewhere that Samsung kind of underclocked the EXYNOS 2400 for the FE, And when you read Geekbench's sort of analysis of the chipset, they're right. The single core cluster is smaller in frequency, not by much, versus the S24. 3.11 versus 3.21. And in real life, this is probably going to make a negligible difference. However, I did notice some betterment from the S24 over the FE in certain things. The video exporting test that I did, I used Premiere Rush. The S24 was considerably faster sort of the first time I did it, and a little bit faster the second time. I think that just goes to show the consistency is there, whereas the FE might not be as well optimized with that sort of lower frequency for that stuff on a consistent basis. In those sort of tests, the FE is okay. It doesn't reach the heights of the S24, but it also doesn't lag too far behind. But that's not really the whole story here. The other part to this story is the fact that the battery on the S24 FE, paired with potentially a lower powered display because it doesn't push the same brightness, and a slightly underclocked processor, meaning with that 4,700 milliamp hour battery, you're going to get a really long lasting battery life. Now that's just accounting for like overall context. If we're just looking at pure size, the S24 Plus with its 4,900 milliamp hour battery is obviously on paper better. But when you factor in the other elements to it, the display, the processor, and the battery, you likely will get better out of the S24 FE. I also have this theory too, correct me if I'm wrong, but people who don't buy the higher end flagship phones aren't using their phone as much. So their perception of good battery life will actually be different to a power user. So they might push their phone out for 2 days because they're not picking it up and using it as frequently as someone who's got an S24 Plus or an S24 Ultra might do. So with that sort of part of it, you do actually get a bit of a different experience. And that's why I really don't like doing battery tests at all, because everyone's usage is going to be vastly different from each other. So someone using an FE won't be using their phone the same as someone using an S24 Plus or an Ultra. Let me know your thoughts about that. I'm keen to hear what you guys think. So 2 phones, 1 name. The S24 obviously is the higher end phone. The other thing is that this kind of has that this doesn't is things like always on display. Let me clarify. The new always on display. The S24 has the always on display where you can have the cutout at the top, whereas the S24 FE does not feature it. So there's some software differences in certain areas where the FE doesn't cater for the higher end stuff. A lot of that's down to the actual hardware too, like the display on the S24, S24 Plus, and the S24 Ultra can cater for that because of the display technology that's being used. Whereas the FE is obviously not using that flagship display. In most cases, it will be fine, but in this scenario, you won't have it. Another editor's note to add in, Galaxy AI. These 2 devices obviously support it, and the S24 FE out of the box has the same Galaxy AI experience as the Galaxy S24. Every single feature is listed there and functions and performs identically, which is great. If you want to watch Galaxy AI and sort of learn how to use it, you can go watch my full Galaxy AI tutorial with the oneui 6.11 update that came with the Galaxy S24 series just the other week. So let me know which one you think is better for you, whether you like the idea of the flagship S24 and S24 Plus, or whether you'd be happy making a couple of sacrifices in a couple of areas to get the S24 FE. Let me know in the comments. Hit subscribe to take the benefits. Lots more Samsung content coming your way. I'll see you guys in the next one.